Hey everybody, it's Daja M. Rice and you're watching Daddy's Girl Live. Daddy's Girl. I'm gonna try to keep this short, you guys. I don't want to talk your head off, but I got a story and I think it'll bless you, and I'm gonna take whatever time I need to tell it. All right, so let's jump right in. So let's go ahead and start with where I'm from, what my childhood was like pre broken home. Okay, so I'm originally from a small town in New York called Spring Valley. And I know I said town. Some of you are probably like,
what town? New York has towns?
Yes, all of New York is not the city. So I always tell people where I'm from is like upstate, but it's not upstate like Rochester, Buffalo, Attica, upstate. It's just enough upstate that it's not in the Bronx, which is kind of like the upstate of the city, but whatever. So that's where I'm from. And when I was born into a family of already 4 children, and my mom and my dad were together. They were married. So when I was born, I was the 5th child of this already big family, and I was the baby. So what was my childhood like around that time? My childhood was fairly normal during that time because I was the baby and I was like the typical youngest child. So even to this day, I have people who tell me I was spoiled and I am spoiled. I always say, like, I didn't spoil myself, so there you have it. But yeah, I just had like the typical baby of the family childhood, like, and I also want to make it very clear that my experience, I'm talking about my experience, because I think as I've grown, and especially as I've grown in God, and he has kind of released me to share my testimony with people or my experiences, I have learned that my experiences are not the same as other people who share these experiences with me. Shared experiences do not mean like experiences. So you can live in the same home with somebody, you can grow up with somebody, and your experiences can be totally different. Okay, so this is Daja's childhood through the lens of Daja. So when I was 6 years old, my family moved from Spring Valley or Rockland County to a city called Wallenpaupack, Pennsylvania. And it's kind of like the Lake Erie area. If any of you have ever vacationed in Pennsylvania, like in the Poconos, it wasn't too far from there. And so we had a really nice home, kind of like in the mountains of Pennsylvania. One of the moments of my childhood, one of them that are kind of like stamped in my memory and can kind of replay in my mind, very much like a movie, is our last day in that home. And the reason why is because I always felt like our last day in that home in Pennsylvania was our last day that I remember us being a family as I knew it, you know? And so I can remember the moments standing in the foyer of that home and watching my father moving furniture out the front door, and life after that day would never look the same for me. So we moved into our grandparents' home in the Bronx, New York, and we lived in her basement, and this wasn't a finished basement. it was a New York basement. Okay, so my mom moved in her parents' basement in the Bronx with her children, and I remember not seeing my father as much, but but he wasn't quite a quote unquote absentee dad yet. So my father would come like maybe every weekend, or every several days he would come to the Bronx, because he was living in Rockland again at the time. So he would come back to the Bronx to visit with us, and I remember seeing him less and less and less, and then we moved to South Carolina. Now, keep in mind, I'm 8 years old. I still really have not been able to like totally grasp the concept of our family being split up. So all I know is that I'm not seeing my daddy as much as I used to see him. And I think when we lived in the Bronx in my grandparents' basement, I think I had a moment where I might have alluded to the question of like, where's my daddy? And my mom, I don't remember exactly what she said to me, but I just remember the look on her face. And I didn't understand that look then, but being a little older now, oh God, when I see my mother's face in that moment, I see pain, I see confusion, I see fear, I see disappointment, I see shame. Those are all of the things I remember seeing on my mother's face. And I don't know what she told me in that moment, but I know whatever she told me, it wasn't the complete truth. Because as children, parents want to protect their children. Like, you don't want to give your children too much, especially the things that they can understand. And here's the really important part: the things that they can't understand, the things that you don't have the hardware to explain. So I never knew until I got older and started to unpack these things that my mom, she didn't keep an explanation, or she didn't keep the truth from me to hurt me, or because she wanted me to suffer in confusion and not knowing. But she just couldn't. She couldn't explain those things to me because she was going through something that she couldn't explain even for herself. Nonetheless, around that time, I was only like 8, 9 years old. So I didn't have the cognitive development to understand that, right? I was very egocentric. I was a child. Everything was about me, and so I believed whatever I wanted to believe. And what I wanted to believe was that everything that was happening was my mom's fault. And the reason why is because I didn't see my daddy. I didn't see his new girlfriend. I didn't see him going on and living his life. I didn't see, my mom was very sheltering towards me. So there were a lot of things that she did not expose me to. And I mean, the nights when she went without food because we had to eat, the times when she sent us to stay with a family member because she was sleeping in a car, the times when she was on the phone asking my daddy to send money and he didn't for whatever reason. I didn't see those things. I know about those things now, but as a child, I didn't see those things. All I knew was that everything around me was changing. There was this big whirlwind, this big hurricane, this big tornado. All of the natural disasters were happening around me, and the only thing that was constant was my mama. So now I rejoice in that. Now I say my mama was a strong woman. She was a pillar of strength, right? But back then I thought, oh, you the only thing that's standing solid in all of this. In my 8-year-old mind, you are the only thing that kind of seems to have a grip right now. And so you must be in control of all of this. And so that must mean all of this is your fault. And I started to build up this big wall of resentment towards my mother. That was the beginning of it. I mean, then you fast forward into my teen years. I mean, I'm not even a teenager yet. And you know, there's a bunch of stuff that teenagers already go through. But you're talking about, you know, a preteen, somebody who's just 9 years old, 10 years old, starting to build up resentment for their mom because I felt like my life was in shambles and it was because of her. So if I could just put a pin right there, like, I want to encourage parents and children. So parents, I know that during a split up or a huge transition, it may be something that's fairly new to you as well, and you don't really have the language or you don't have the understanding to really explain to your children the depth of what is happening. But I would encourage you to just seek wise counsel, or even utilize whatever little understanding that you have of the situation and try to explain to them what is happening. Because for me, when I was a kid, because nobody sat me down and explained the truth to me, I started to develop a false truth. And it made me form a big wall of resentment towards my mom. And I even want to encourage children, you know, if you're old enough to even understand this, and if you're watching, that when there are huge transitions happening in your home or in your family, just know that you're not the only person who's hurting. Even though parents, they show us that they're strong, they show us that they know it all and that they have it all under control, they have moments where life takes them by surprise as well. The people that we depend on, the people that we lean on, they don't always know what to do. They don't always have the answers. And in those moments, we just have to be compassionate towards them because they're human too. So for the first several years of my parents split up, because they hadn't even gotten a divorce yet, but their breakup, it wasn't unstable. I know some people will hear me say sometimes like I had an unstable upbringing, and I'm about to get around to that. But between the age of 9 and like into 14, my it wasn't really that unstable because my mom was dating someone and he was a stand-up guy. He figured, I'm going to be in this woman's life, and so I am also going to take care of her household. And so he did that, and for that reason there was a certain degree of lack and instability that we did not experience. And so when the lack and instability really became noticeable to me, was after they parted ways, and then my mom was just like completely on her own. So the point when things really took a turn and my upbringing really became unstable, is around the age of 14, 15. So my mom, she was trying to figure things out, and I think she had made the decision that she wanted to move to Georgia, but she wasn't quite ready to make that move yet, or she was trying to tie up loose ends in South Carolina. But we were in a transition between Georgia and South Carolina, and my mom sent me to live with one of her good friends until she was ready to come. And I think that was supposed to be for a week or two. That ended up being like close to a year. And so I went like very close to a year, definitely a whole school year, not living in my mother's home, which I know that that's not an uncommon thing. Like many children grow up with their grandparents or grow up with aunties and uncles or cousins or whatever, just because their parents find it necessary to, you know, send them to those people for a season, for a moment. And so my mom did that for whatever reason she found necessary at the time. But what I think she didn't expect was that the resentment that I already had boiling underneath the surface for her, that it would just become like a huge explosion once she came back into my daily life. Like she was a parent, and so she still wanted to be seen as a parent. She still wanted to be seen as an authoritarian, and she still wanted to put her foot down and hold the line with me. And that resentment had just built up so much that I wasn't trying to hear that. And so there was constantly a tug of war between me and my mom, and that tug of war continued throughout my teen years. Verbal altercations, there were some physical things, there was a lot of unspoken hatred and resentment, because I was hurting in ways that even as a teenager I didn't know how to explain. After we moved to Georgia, I mean, I was just moving from place to place. I mean, there were times where I wasn't in a place longer than a couple weeks, longer than a month. And so I just kind of started to build even more of a wall, because I had to teach myself how to not get attached to people because I was always moving. No, people weren't coming and going out of my life, but I was coming and going out of people's lives so much that I started to operate under this spirit of isolation, and I started to live life on this island by myself. And even started, when I did have interactions with people, it was always on the opposite end of a long handle spoon, because I had developed this mentality and this habit of not getting too close to people. And what I realized later on was that it was self-rejection, that I was so fearful that all of the habits, all of the impurities that had been developed in a season of survival would be exposed to people if I got too close to them. And I was so good at keeping secrets. I was so good at not sharing my personal business with people, not really being intimate with people. And so I felt like if that was exposed to people, that I could possibly get hurt. And so in order to protect myself, in order to shield myself from being hurt, from being disappointed by people, I put up this wall. I believe, even though I didn't know, because I didn't understand spiritual things then, and even though my mom didn't know how to properly facilitate that season for me, I believe that the enemy knew that all of the things that I was dealing with. And I believe that he knew exactly what to expose me to in order to take me down a dark path. So I lost my virginity at 16. And by the time that I was 21, I had more partners than I could count on two hands. So I had a long season of promiscuity. A lot of people talk about going out and getting drunk and getting wasted for their 21st birthday. I didn't even do that for my 21st birthday because I had done all of that before the age of 18. Getting drunk, trying to party, hang out, being promiscuous, hanging out in clubs with prostitutes, drug dealers. But I didn't know that it was the hand of the enemy. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about having an enemy. I didn't know anything about that. But the reason why I'm sharing this with you guys is because I truly believe that I have a testimony of preservation as well. I believe that even through those years of confusion and darkness, that even though the hand of the enemy exposed me to things that I should not have been exposed to, I had experiences that I should not have had, God was with me through all of that. I mean, I was hanging out in clubs illegally where there was, where they were selling drugs, selling women, and not once did I get locked up and put in jail. Not once did I get turned out. Not once did I get hooked on drugs. I was being promiscuous. I was, getting in sexual relationships with multiple men, and not once did I even have a pregnancy scare. I'm telling you, I have a testimony of preservation. God preserved me because my life could have looked so different. My life could have looked so different if the hand of God had not been on my life. If God had not wanted to use me in a way that he so carefully even orchestrated my dark season so that I could come out as pure gold. And this is not me saying that people who do get pregnant at a young age cannot come out as pure gold. This is not me saying that people who have the testimony of prostitution or getting hooked on drugs cannot come out as pure gold, but because of the will of God for my life, he chose to preserve me from those type of experiences, even though I was in the company of those things. And so I just thank God. I'll put a pin right there. I thank God for preserving me, that I can say that I truly, truly, truly came through the fire but did not get burned. I thank God. I want you guys to know that I know sometimes we talk about our testimonies and we talk about all the hell we've been through, and then at the end we say, but God. But I just want to say that even in the dark season, even within the confusion, even within the disillusionment, even within the resentment, even within the unforgiveness, all of those things that I experienced, God was with me the whole time. I said that the hand of the enemy was on me. Well, God's hand was on me, and God's hand was stronger, and God's hand preserved me from those things that the enemy meant to take me under. So even after a long season of promiscuity and all those things that you can read about in my book, I definitely started to feel the void of not having my father around. And so this was about 22, 23 when I started to feel that. Part of the reason is because I had met my now husband, Jonathan, and I was holding him to false expectations of filling the void of my father. I was so wrapped up in these ideals. There were a lot of things that I had never experienced, so I started to form ideals about them. I had never had a consistent male presence in my life, and so I didn't know how that was supposed to look. I had never experienced pure romantic love with a man before, and so I didn't know how that was supposed to look. I didn't know about compromise. I didn't know that this island that I had built from moving from place to place. I didn't know that I didn't have to stand on this island any longer, that there was a person here who really cared about me and who had my best interests at heart. I didn't know those things. I had this wall up and I didn't even realize that I did it. I didn't realize that I was loving him from the opposite end of a long-handled spoon until he had to tell me, like, you want me to be your daddy and I can't be. And it was in that moment that I really started to come into all of the revelations about healing and redemption and forgiveness that I share with you guys now. It was that moment that I started to come into the knowledge of all of that, because I started my journey of healing. I had to realize that if I wanted this relationship to work, I had to heal wounds from other relationships, and not romantic relationships. I had to heal wounds from the relationship with my father, the relationship with my mother. And so once I began to work diligently and intentionally at healing those wounds, then I could start to see myself in a healthy romantic relationship with Jonathan. So one thing that you'll hear me talk about often is the capacity to love, right? So when I started my journey of healing and forgiveness with my natural father, God revealed to me that I needed the capacity to love. He broke it down real plain to me. He told me I had to have the capacity to love. He said, you have so much buildup around your heart that you don't even have room for the kind of love that I want to put in your heart. You have resentment, you have hatred, you have disillusionment, you have disappointment, you have sexual abuse, you have promiscuity, you have shame, you have hurt, you have confusion, you have all of these things built up in your heart. And so the way I want to get you to love, the pure love that I want to instill in you, you have no room for it. And so God began to take me through a process of literally like purging my heart of all of those things that were taking up love's space. I began to develop an awareness of what belonged there and what didn't. So the capacity to love is not about not having moments where it might be hard to forgive, not having moments where you might resent other people. It's the awareness of, okay, that doesn't belong there and it can't coexist with the love of God. And so whatever I need to do, I need to purge my heart of that stain. I call them heart stains. I need to purge my heart of that impurity, that stain, so that I can love the way God would have me to love. So I can forgive the way God would have me to forgive. So ever since I had that revelation of the capacity to love, it's just really driven me forward in my spiritual walk with Christ. I mean, it's really re-identified me to the point now where I understand that I am not my past experiences, my past indiscretions, my past offenses, the bad decisions that I made or my parents made or other people made. I'm not those bad calls that I made or that my parents made or that other people made, or I'm none of that. I'm not identified by that. I'm not labeled by that, but I am a child of God first and foremost. And so that sets me completely free. That sets me completely free from my past. I mean, Romans 8:15 tells us that we have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but we have received the spirit of adoption, and we cry, Abba, Father. I am completely free. I am identified, re-identified through my heavenly Father. And so that means I'm worthy. That means I am significant. That means I am beautiful. That means that I am powerful. That means that I have authority. That means that I have dominion. That means that I have power. I said that already. But all the things that God says about me in His Word, that is how I identify myself. I'm no longer the broken child who grew up in a broken home. I'm no longer the abused child who someone took advantage of sexually. I am no longer the promiscuous teenager who was lost and confused, so she decided to give pieces of herself away in sexual relationships. I am no longer the person who doesn't know who they are, so they withhold themselves from people and try to interact with people on the opposite end of a long handled spoon. I am no longer that girl. I am the same girl that God has called powerful, that God has called an heir to His throne, that God has called His own. So I just want to encourage y'all that if you have a testimony that is anything like my own, maybe it wasn't growing up in a quote-unquote broken home, or maybe it wasn't promiscuity, or maybe it wasn't feeling isolated from everything and everybody, but you have a story. We all have a story. I just want you to know that everything that you have gone through, everything that you are possibly going through right now, everything that you will go through in the future, even in your walk with Christ, because as believers, as children of God, we are not exempt to the trials of this world, but we do know that God is with us through it all. And I want you to know that no matter what it is that you may have had to deal with, or that you may be dealing with now in your present, God is taking all of those things that you are experiencing, and He's working them together for your good. You're going to have a beautiful testimony. You're going to have a beautiful story about how God brought you through. You're going to have a beautiful testimony about how you came through the fire, but you didn't get burned. I just want to encourage you to continue to press forward, because there is a great reward. There is a great testimony. There is a latter glory that you are pressing towards. And I want you to know that you're not alone, that I'm rooting for you. I'm praying for you, that God is with you. And when you're weak, He is strong, and that you're going to be all right. You're going to make it through. I have a beautiful testimony, and I believe that you are going to have one too. And so God bless you. Thank y'all so much for being with me today on Daddy's Girl Live. I pray that my testimony reaches you wherever you need it to reach during this time. And don't forget, we are back here every Friday for the next several weeks, just talking about being a daddy's girl and being reconciled, being reestablished, being restored through Jesus Christ, through our Heavenly Father. And remember that Friday, June 12th, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are premiering Daddy's Girls Re-Identified right here on Facebook, but you got to get your ticket. It's only $12 at www.thericesenterprises.com/merch. You get your ticket there, and then you and your whole entire family can enjoy the film from the comfort of your own home. And then if you go to that same web address, you can also get a copy of Daddy's Girl from Heartbreak to Redemption and learn more about my process of healing, redemption, and freedom. All right, I love y'all so much. Thank you so much for hanging with me today. I hope that this has blessed you. I hope that you have heard something that has reached your heart, and I just love you guys. I'll see you next week. Blessings.
I'm chasing for my daddy. I'm yearning for my daddy, daddy, daddy.